Hello and welcome back to our series on learning Google App Scripts for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals and really rethinking how we're delivering our HR services and solutions by utilizing the tools that we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and in this video here, I would like to take a look at our HR admin interface. We have it pretty much complete from this functionality. And that functionality is we are able to create a record, retrieve a record, update a record, and then archive a record and produce notifications as it appears. We've also created our instructions when you first pull it up. And the one thing that I would like to do right off the bat is change this information banner up here because anytime that you give your user instructions or an alert, you want to draw their eyes from everything else that's going on the screen. You want to draw their eyes up to where you're wanting them to read. So here, I would like to change this from this graphite-ish color to maybe a bright yellow with black lettering because it's such a contrast that their eyes are naturally going to be able to go over there and look at it. So we're going to do that. And then now that we have a way to interact with our records, what I would like to do is create a different view because really we want to get into the HR piece, particularly the analytics. And this UI sidebar here, there's no way within Google, it's been depreciated. So that means they kind of took it away. There's no way to take this sidebar and make it larger. It is the size that it is. What we could do is we could add in more fields, like say, of course, you're going to want other things in here, such as um, maybe some demographics, some EEO information, as well as maybe some benefits information, date of last salary increase, performance management criteria, things of that nature. And as we're creating more and more fields, it's going to push it lower and lower and lower. And the user, in order to create that record, is going to have to scroll, which, is fine to a point. And this can become so cumbersome to where this size box here isn't necessarily going to fit what it is that's needed. And for that, instead of using a UI interface that's built into our spreadsheet here, what we would do is take the spreadsheet, use it as a database, and then create a web app. And there will be a future video on a web app because in order to make this a fully dynamic dashboard along with an analytic tool, we are going to need a little bit more space. But I don't want to create a massive HRIS system right off the bat because if we're going to use it, it can't be generalized enough to be used across all industries without significant tweaking. So ideally, you would take what we have here as a sample and then do a use case on what it is that your industry and company needs. And then you would build and modify what we have here written in code, the samples here, and then expand it out to actually meet that need. But there's one piece that I would like to provide y'all before we end this series, and that is changing views. So what we would like to do is some sort of analysis. And if we were to put an analysis here, it would clutter up the record. It would just be difficult to discern for users. Okay, this is a record, and then I got to scroll all the way down, and hidden is a way that I can do analytics. What we can do is change the view. And what I mean by changing the view is something that we've already done. So when we hit process, we have this information bar that is set to block. And then after 5 seconds, it automatically sets itself to none. It disappears and it doesn't take up space. We could do the same exact thing with our record information here and then create another div that is specifically for analytics. And then it shows this entire section once you press a button like records, and hides it when you push a button such as analytics. And then it sets the analytics div to block. So that's a way that we can create different views. Again, in the future, we're going to create a uh, series consisting of actually building a web app to where this entire piece, this UI, won't be in the spreadsheet. It'll be on its own separate web page built with Google Apps scripts that's attached to our spreadsheet. That way, we have a lot more room to play with. We can create different pages and really make it a lot more robust. But for now, this is a good introduction and it does serve our purposes. So let's go ahead and initially change this line up here. And we can do that simply with CSS. We'll go over here to our HTML. And what we're looking for is our notification div. And our notification div, we don't want to set the whole div to yellow. That would be obnoxious. What we want is just that span where it says information. So in order to select the span, we could do it by class, input group text. But what that input group text is going to do is it's going to select every element with that class. And we don't want that. We want to specifically identify this. Now we could isolate it by the first occurrence of input group div, but that really hinders our ability to create something above it, which we're actually going to do. So let's instead give this an ID. And this ID is going to be, let's just call it notification span. And then what we're going to do is go up to our style, our CSS here. And since we're not selecting the class, remember the class takes the period, we're selecting the ID. To select an ID, we use a hashtag and then the ID name, notification span. And what we're wanting to do is set the background of this, the background color. Well, let's try yellow. And let's make this important. And the reason we're making this important is because we've set the input group text to this graphite-ish color. And we set that as important to override what Bootstrap already had. And now we're going to override that important with this yellow. So let's go save this and then let's check and see how that yellow turns out. Hopefully it's a nice yellow and not a hideous yellow. Ooh, okay, that works. So now you'll see that we also have to change the color. So we'll go back here and now let's change the color to not white. We'll change it to black and we'll use hex. The good thing about the black color is it is all zeros. And I mean, we can do 3 zeros. That'll be fine. I believe, just like we did the whites up here. All right, so now let's go back here and try this again. Hit process. There we go. That works. Now, as you can see, your eyes automatically are forced to look at that bright color. And you can change that color to whatever you like. But for now, let's just leave it yellow. And so now what we're wanting to do is we are wanting to put some select buttons up here. And the select buttons will control toggling our divs to where they're either set to block or none, just like we have our notification. So let's go to our Bootstrap. Let's go to our Bootstrap here. And let's find our buttons. Okay, so we have our buttons. And since we're dealing with limited space, I don't want to create a nav bar. But our buttons are here, and these are individual buttons. Let's look at our button groups. So our button groups, see, that looks like it'll work right there. Our button groups are basically in a single line, and they're clumped together. So we could do record, uh, we can do record, we can do analytics in the middle, and then we could do, I don't know, benefits or something over here, maybe compensation, uh, or whatever it is that we would need. So let's grab this, let's snag this. And as you can see down here, it gives you a little warning. Anytime that we create something HTML wise or that is visible through a screen, when we develop it, we have to ensure that we meet criteria to allow all users to be able to interact with it. So we have technology such as screen readers, and the screen readers identify these simply by certain roles. So this role here, group the screen reader, will identify that as a group of buttons, and then this label here describes what it is. So we will need to change, we'll leave the group, but we'll need to change this area label. And this is important for accommodations. If you're using it specifically for yourself and nobody else is using it, this isn't necessarily as important. But the second somebody else uses it or has the chance of using it, you really do need to pay attention to accessibility. So let's copy this over. And then what we'll do is we'll go back over to our code. And where we're wanting this, let's look at our layout here real quick. We don't want it under the notification because the notification is nice. We want to keep the notifications, but what we can do is place it above this information div here and maybe separate it by a line. So let's go in here, look at our line here. Let's create a line to separate our notifications. So now it has a line on top, line on bottom. And then let's put our button group right here. Now this area is, we can just put navigation buttons instead of the example. We want to change this to records, and we'll change this to analytics for now. Now, when we save this, it is going to be left justified. It's going to be all the way over on the left. So what we'll do is we'll save it, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to have to adjust this. We'll open our sidebar here. And as you can see, it's all the way over here on the left. And when we hover it, it goes to the default gray because that's how we have it set up, which, is fine. What we can do is actually make it an outline, which we'll probably do. I like that. And we want to take this whole group over here and shove it over to the middle. And we want to do that not static, because if you increase the size, it could kind of mess with that spacing. So let's go over to our Bootstrap again, and let's go down here to our display. Okay, so we have our display. What we're actually wanting is flex. And our flex, we don't want an inline flex. That's a flex container. Here we go, direction. We want it right smack dab in the middle. We'll scroll down here, justify content. Here we go. And justify center content. So it's this right here, and you can see that it's simply a class. So what we can do is copy this deflex justify content center that they already built into CSS for us. Just copy that. We'll go back over here to our HTML code, and this div, we want to go at the end of the class, because remember, we can always have additional classes assigned to it. So now when we save this and come back over here and then refresh our sidebar, you'll see that it is essentially stretched all the way across. We'll get rid of this right here real quick because we don't want that yet. If we ever needed one, we can easily just copy and add it. Then we'll go over and save it. And now what we did was we removed this right button here. So now when we refresh it, you'll see what happens with the Flex Justify content. It is taking the content and essentially centering it. But since we don't have we're not defining columns, it's just filling the entire width, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now let's take this and actually do the outline. So we'll run back over here to our Bootstrap real quick. So we'll run back over here, our Bootstrap. And so we got back to our buttons, and what we're looking for is this right here. So outline styles, it looks like it takes the same exact thing as this, this button outline. So what we can do is go back to our code and grab our button outline here. Button outline secondary. So we'll grab this and then we'll put it up here, and that should take care of our buttons. So we don't want button primary, we want button outline secondary. And the secondary and the primary, just as a reminder, in Bootstrap, they determine the color or the shade, I guess, of the button based on secondary, danger, what have you. And we took care of our button hover by changing it to that graphite gray. So now when we go back over here and refresh it, it's not going to be blue. It will be just like our process button. And then as we highlight it, it'll go that way. So that works for now. And then as you can see, our information comes underneath it. So this will always be available. And we can give ourselves a little bit of space here. I'll do that when we go back. So what we're wanting to do right now, these buttons don't do nothing. They're just there. You can mash them all you want. Nothing's going to happen. But we can fix that by having our records button essentially toggle this piece off and on. Now we want to keep our employee number because our employee number is how we're going to pull information. So we are wanting to pull information for our records. And then what we're wanting to do is pull information for our analytics. So we're going to need to pull that information the same way through our employee number. So we don't want to collapse that. We want to leave that permanently available. So what we can do is wrap last name up to record action in a div. And then we can take that entire div and do the same thing that we did with our information and set it to block or nudge. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's wrap it in a div. Go back over here to our HTML code. So we want to keep our employee number, but we would like to wrap this in a div. And let's give this div an ID. And this ID is going to equal, let's call this record section. And now what we need to do is come down here to our button to close it out. Go down a space here, and we'll close out the div, give ourselves a nice little reminder that this is a record section. Okay, good. So now what we can do is jump up here and use this same language to set the display of that div to none. So we can come down here and come down here to our record section, div, and simply set that style to none. So now when we save this, we can go back here, show this tab, and then refresh. And you'll see that only the employee number is available. Everything else is not viewable and is not taking up space. So when the user uses this or sees this, then this is what he's going to see. I would like this process button to go away. So I think we need to move that div down to our process button. And then while we're there, we will also go ahead and give ourselves some space here and then write the code to toggle this. So let's go back to our code here. Let's go down here and see where we ended our div. And we ended our div right here, and where we're wanting to end it is right here. That'll include that process button. So now let's go up here and give our button group a margin. And you know this margin B, this MB is the bottom margin, and it's set to 3, which is a good space, but we're not wanting the bottom, we're wanting the top. So what we're going to put in here is MT, and we'll use 3, and we'll see how that goes. What that'll do is it'll give us a little bit of space from that top head. And let's give our button a way to interact with a function. So what we can do is, instead of setting a listener, we'll just call the function within our button here. And this button we'll put down here on click. We want this to equal a function name, and that function name is, let's call it record toggle. Over here and encapsulate it. So now anytime that this button is clicked, it'll do this record toggle. So let's go ahead and create this record toggle function down here. Okay, so that's a notification toggle. So we will just add it right up here on top. Function record toggle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the same exact piece in here, except for this timeout. We don't need this timeout. But we'll copy all of this and then trim it. So we don't need this set timeout piece. We don't need this. And what we're going to change is we don't want to select the notification box. What we want to do is select this div. We want to be able to select this record section ID. So first, let's create a variable that selects that record section. And instead of burying it inside a function like this, let's create it up here outside of a function so it's global. So let's do record section is going to equal document.getElementById, and that ID is going to be record section. So now we can use this record section in any function. So we want to replace this notification box thing with our record section. And once we get all of these functions built, we can actually take this function, and then the other function to toggle our analytics and put it in one function to where we just check with an if statement, depending on what button was pushed, and run that block of code. That way we can clean up all these functions, not have repeating functions. So now we have that. So let's save this and then go back to our sheet and see where we are at. That process button is still there. Okay, we'll go in and look at that. We'll have to figure out where that process button is actually going. Let me refresh it here. That process button should be hidden, and it's not. So we'll look at that. But ultimately, this records button, when we press it, it should essentially toggle the style display. And nothing. So let's go back and see what we got going on here. So we have record toggle on click. That button is pushed. Yeah. And we have this notification block, this div, style display set to none, records section. This div. And then record section, get element by ID, record section, record toggle. That's that. That's that. Set to none. Record section style display. Style display. Okay, I'm wondering if it's just because of my internet connection lag. Yep, there we go. Okay. It's a combination of that container element, not including the button. So we had a div missed. Now, when we press record, still nothing. So we are missing a spelling or something. So let's scroll through here and read what it is that we could be missing. Okay, and often you'll find that often when something is not working, it is something so simple and obnoxiously overlooked that, yep, it is. So what I mistakenly did was, instead of writing this in camel case, I put a capital R there. So this ID was not aligning with our element right there. So now if we save this and then we go back and refresh it, now when we click it, it populates. So now we can do the same exact thing to analytics. So what we'll do is, the last piece of this video, we will create an analytics section. And what we're wanting to do is essentially, when we press analytics, this goes away and shows the analytics. And then when we press records, analytics closes to none and this shows up. So let's go ahead and create just an empty div here, and we'll just put some simple text. So we'll go back here and we can just simply start this down here after this button. And we'll have to move this container as well. But after our button here, we want to create another div, and we will give this div an ID of analytic section. Keep it simple. And we'll just simply do let's do an H4 with simple hello. Seems like a common thing in coding. Your first thing is hello world. And we'll close out that div. Analytic section. And now what we'll do is we need to give our analytics button the same exact thing. We need to give it a on click. So what we'll do is we will copy this piece here and we will create, instead of record toggle, we'll just call this analytics toggle. And now let's go create that function down here and do the same exact thing that we just did for the record toggle. So what we're going to do is we need to create that variable, let analytics section equal documents. And then this is going to be analytics section. That needs to be in quotes. And now let's create this function. And that function is going to be the same exact thing as our record toggle, except it's not going to be calling our record section. It'll be calling our analytics section. So let's go ahead and copy the contents of this. And instead of record section, it's going to be analytics section. So we'll make that change. And again, we'll go through and get rid of all these redundant functions and make this a little bit more elegant. So now let's make sure that we have everything in camel case and everything's aligned up. We're not missing like an S or something. Okay, analytics toggle. Now this container is set to close at our process button. So when we go to save and refresh this, the one thing that we haven't done, I just realized, is we have not set our new section to none. So let's copy that and go down here and do that to our new section. We want to set that to none to where it's empty. So now we'll say when we go back here, this may be ill-aligned because it's not part of that container. And so as you can see, nothing's here. We go to analytics. Okay, something's popped up again. So let's go back here and figure out what it is that we did. Again, we forgot the S. It's the problem when you start naming variables. You don't want it to be so simple to where you don't know what it is, but you also don't want to make it so complex with so many different letters that you may actually screw up like we have been. And there we go. So now when we toggle that, it sets it to none. But the one thing that we're going to have to fix here is notice how this element is all the way over and this piece right here has this nice little gap. That's because of that container, and we have that container closed before this div here. So all we have to do is just move that closing container, and that will incorporate this into that container div. And then the other thing we need to do is if somebody goes to analytics and then goes to records, you'll notice that it doesn't set this to none. It just pushes it on top of it. So what we would like to do is when we press analytics, it sets this to none and then it sets that to block. So we can fix that by setting it to none before it runs. So first, let's take this container closing tag here and let's move it down here. And that takes care of that alignment. And then let's come down here and before we run our analytics our analytics section here, we want to take our record section and set it to none. So it automatically collapses that regardless. And then we want to do the same exact thing. We want to do the same exact thing to our record. Before it even gets to the if statement, we want to set our analytics section to none. So what that'll do is that'll close it and then run our block of code. So now let's see if that fixed it. Go back over here and let's see if that took care of our spacing error issue, which it did. Notice how now it's part of this container, so it's going to be aligned. Now, if we go to record, it should set this to none and then populate it. And you'll notice that it shut down. And then if we go to analytics, it'll close this to none and then it'll open up the piece. So let's go up here and hit our analytics. Getting some very interesting lag here. But as you see, it goes away, hit analytics, that goes away and it populates. Now we'll be able to come in, hit an employee number, and then do something with that employee number without having all that other record pieces in the way. It's hidden from view. So I'm going to end this video here. And the next video, what we'll do is we will start building out our calculations. So what I would like to do is just create a very simple calculator initially, and then possibly grab some salaries and, maybe find the average or whatnot. So I hope this video has been helpful, and we hope to look forward to seeing you at the next video. And until then, please take care.